If you've seen some of my last videos, you know that I was just in the United States for a small trip to spend time with my family. But I am back, and I have some opinions about the United States. I've been out of the United States for almost 14 years now, and I haven't even visited since 2018, right at the end of 2018. So it's been almost 5 years, basically 5 years since I've been back. So I want to share some of my thoughts after going back after 5 years and essentially being out of the country since 2010. And I have some interesting opinions. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that I actually personally experienced, and not talk about kind of the bigger social issues, because some of them are harder to reflect on based on where I was spending time, and also because not everything was in your face, like homelessness or drug problems. I'll talk about it briefly, but because what I experienced may not be the norm, or what's shown on social media may not be the norm, it's very hard to touch on those. So let's get started with the first thing, which was food. Everybody has to eat. So food was definitely very different in the United States. It's very similar to what I remember, but having been away for so long, it was very obvious how much processed food there is in the grocery stores, and then also how much like artificial flavoring is used in sweeteners and sugar and sodium, like salts, because all the food that I ate was super sweet or super salty. It was like one or the other. It was like super salty, like chips and like those types of snacks, or like fast food like McDonald's and stuff was super salty, or it was very sweet, like ice cream and pastries and other things that are, sweet, like donuts and things. And it was actually very difficult to eat. I had a lot of stomach problems because my body just wasn't used to it. I often felt bloated or constipated, which is not pleasant to talk about, but I'm talking about my real experiences. And so I had a difficult time in the United States with the food. And I ate a lot of the stuff that I had from my childhood, which was nice because, again, it's nostalgic and it reminds you of your childhood, and you're like, oh yeah, my mom made me a lot of food. But the whole time I was there, and I was there for a little over a week, about 10 days, my stomach was upset. And it's just because the food quality there is very different, and I think is pretty low. It was really interesting going through the produce section because I was in a grocery store like a Publix, which is common in the South. I went in and I saw all of the vegetables, just shiny, shiny vegetables, picture perfect vegetables. And I'm like, oh, this is really weird to see vegetables. Like I literally talked to I was with my mom at the time. I was like, whoa, this is really weird. Because everything, like all the apples were like waxed, because they wax it and they spray chemicals on all of the fruits and vegetables to make them look very appealing. And that was something that I noticed with the food, that a lot of it seemed to be looking very appealing, but maybe the nutritional value wasn't that high. So it was interesting to eat the food. The other thing I noticed when I was in the stores were the prices. And I did a video about this. Actually, my last video was about a price comparison between China and the United States. It was really interesting because some of the prices were really high. Like some of the things had gotten really out of control, and a lot of the other things like vegetables and stuff were still pretty normal, like a normal price. So the inflation has definitely kicked in, and you can feel it on certain items, but other items weren't too bad. So that's an interesting video. If you guys want to see that price comparison, you can check out that video when you're done watching this one. Other things that were expensive, it just seemed everything was expensive. Gas and food in the hotel I stayed at, everything just seemed pricey. And I think that's because of the inflation. Some of you will say Bidenomics. Some of you will blame Trump. Who knows? At the end, it just seems like the pandemic has caused a lot of inflation that should have come back down, but it still hasn't. So it was interesting to spend money in the United States. The other thing that was interesting is I had to deal with some banking stuff, but the banks they seemed really slow, really inefficient, and everything was still, like, I paid with cash a lot of places because that just seemed to be the easiest form of payment, which is really weird coming from China because I don't bring my wallet anywhere. I only bring my phone. So being able to pay and having that kind of convenience of paying with your phone just didn't really exist. And, there were some places maybe you could pay with Apple Pay and stuff, but I just didn't see anybody paying with their phone. It was mostly just with their debit card or credit card with the contactless pay. That seemed to be the biggest kind of invention in the last 13, 14 years was the contactless pay, and I felt like I was kind of living in the past, to be honest. Another thing was, I've traveled for 14 years, basically. I've traveled all over the world, and I've never been scammed in terms of my phone paying with my card or with my debit card. And on the last day I was in the United States, the hotel skimmed my card and made a bunch of payments, which was super annoying. And then I had to call to get that sorted. But I felt the banks, because I had to go in and deal with it, I felt they kind of seemed like they haven't progressed, which was surprising, I guess, because you'd think that it'd be more modern. So another thing that I noticed when I was in the stores on social media, there is all these videos about everything being locked up in terms of security. And I even mentioned it in one of my videos previously, talking about some of the things I was going to look for when I went to the United States. And you can watch that video if you want to kind of compare it to this one now of what I was thinking I might see and what I actually saw. So when I was in like the Publix, there was no security things. When I was in like the Walmarts and a couple of the places that I went, there wasn't a lot of security stuff, not more than what I remember. Now, some people commented and said that was only because I was in a smaller town, and the smaller towns don't have as much shoplifting. But I didn't think it was above and beyond what it used to be. There's always been sections within any Walmart or mall that have like security tags on clothes or on hardware, like tools and things like that. So I wasn't surprised by it, and it didn't seem over the top like some of the videos are showing on social media. Now, some of you say in your area it's much worse, and I believe you, because obviously those videos on social media are coming from somewhere, but my personal experience was I didn't really see it. In terms of the people, in my last video, I talked about my very first impressions of being back in the United States, and I said that the people were fat and ugly. And a lot of people took offense to that, which I understand, but that was not directed at any specific person. So if you took offense to that, I'm sorry, because it wasn't actually aimed at you. It was more of an observation. So I looked at the data, and for the obesity issue, according to the statistics, 42% of the population in the United States is obese, and another 30% is overweight. So 2/3 of the people are obese or overweight. So if you have 3 people, 2 of them are going to be overweight or obese. And that's very obvious when you come into the United States. I've traveled this year alone. I've been in Europe. I was in the Netherlands. I was in Portugal. I was also in Vietnam. And I went through Japan when I flew through. And so it is obvious. Now, it might not be something people, feel comfortable talking about, but facts are facts. And the other thing about ugliness, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, as they say. So for me, unfashionable people, which is what I talked about, how there didn't seem to be a lot of fashion, unfashionable people and people that are obese or overweight tend to be less attractive. That's why I was saying that they were ugly to me. Now, if you like that, that's your eye, that's you. You're allowed to like whatever you want. I was merely saying that that's what I noticed when I first arrived, that people were overweight and unfashionable. The other thing that I noticed, a lot of people wanted to talk about homelessness. They said, oh, did you see anything like a lot of homeless people? I actually didn't, and that might have been because I was in a small town. So my parents, again, like I said, live in a relatively small town. And I saw a couple of homeless people when we were driving. They were in the median with little signs saying, I'm homeless, anything helps. Or they were like in parking lots, like near the Walmart or something, kind of near like when you first come into the parking lot with signs. And I didn't see any tents. I didn't see anything that was really over the top, like the tent cities that you see online. Now, I believe those exist because there's clearly footage of it in other parts of the country, but where I was, it really wasn't that bad. I would say that it was about what I was used to. So when I lived in Florida previously, there was always some homeless people around, but it was never out of control. Now, again, if you go to Miami or you go to some of the bigger cities, maybe in Tampa or Orlando, or if you're in LA or, New York or Philadelphia or something like that, you might see more of that. It just, again, these are my personal observations. It didn't seem more than previously. And as for drug use, obviously there's nobody out on the streets just doing drugs. So that one's very hard to see, but there are two anecdotal stories that I can tell you. And one was my mom, actually. She had like a giant ladder that didn't fit in her shed, and she had literally chained it to the side of her house, like locked it up with a chain. And I said, why is it chained up? And she's like, oh, if I don't chain stuff up, like the drug addicts will come and steal anything that's not chained down or locked, which was kind of interesting. I was like, really? And she's like, yeah, because she lives like in a community with other people. She's like, yeah, there's been times where people had their stuff stolen, so it's better just to lock it up. Now, my mom's a little paranoid. She's always been a little paranoid, but it was interesting. The other story that I had was similar to that. And it was a guy, again, I was standing in the bank for like an hour because they were so inefficient. And so I was standing in line with some other people, and these two guys in front of me were talking about their experience, and they were saying the same thing, that one of their houses had been broken into by junkies, and they'd stole everything when he was out of the state. So he was living in Tennessee, and he had a place like a vacation home or something here in Florida, and it was broken into, and nothing came of it. It just got robbed, and that was it. Even when he filed the police report, they're like, oh, we can't do anything. It was just druggies. So there was clearly some stories and some happening, but yeah. And then obviously the story, like the last time in the last video, when I first arrived, I talked about the woman that I went through the airport with. If you want to hear that story, go check out that video. I will link it up above or in the description if you want to hear this crazy drug story about coming into the United States. So homelessness and drugs, I didn't see that much of it. And it might have just been because of where I was. So moving on, the other thing that I want to talk about was actually transportation. One of the things that I really noticed, well, two things. One, first, was just how big the cars were. Everybody had a giant SUV or a truck. And I don't know if that's just because it's Florida or if that's across the nation, but it seemed like everybody had like a tank practically. I mean, these are massive, massive vehicles. And you just don't really see that in other countries, where most countries are going for smaller, more compact cars based on, especially in Europe, based on the location and based on kind of the streets and everything, and based on energy saving. It seems the United States is really going in the opposite direction, where the cars are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I felt tiny standing next to some of these trucks, like they're towering over me. And the other thing, again, transportation is all based around cars. There's nowhere that you can go in the United States, it seems, that you can live without a car. At least in Florida, everything when we were driving was just strip malls, and the architecture is so ugly. It's just strip malls. The whole idea is you pull in, you get what you need, and you go back out. So fast food, Walmarts, everything that's designed around pulling in, getting what you need, and pulling out and going home. And so it doesn't make for very nice cities. It doesn't make for very downtown centric walking cities. And that's always been a problem, but you never notice it when you're living there. But being in Europe, where over the summer when we were in Portugal, we walked everywhere. We didn't even have a car. We didn't rent a car when we were in Portugal. And every city we were in, we could just walk around or hop on the public transportation, subways or buses. And obviously here in Beijing, you can take the subway everywhere. And in most big cities in China, there's subways or buses or mobikes or DDs or, 5 or 6 different ways to get around in the city. Versus it seemed in the United States, it's like you have to own a car. And if you don't have a car, you're pretty much stuck. And so speaking of the transportation and the downtowns and the airports and stuff, I said this in the last video. Everything seemed a little run down. So in the last 14 years since I left the United States, going back, it didn't feel like anything had really progressed. In the sense of everything that was new or built was in the strip malls. So the strip malls were built, you know, you'd have a CVS, or you'd have a Chipotle, or you'd have a McDonald's or something, or you'd have like a Walmart or a Walgreens, CVS, those types of things. The strip malls have been built, but it's the ugliest architecture around because it's not really designed for anything other than a facade to look okay from like the front, because there's no depth to it. You don't go into it because it's literally you pull up to the front, get what you need, and you leave. So everything beyond the surface seemed very kind of run down. The airport seemed kind of run down. I went through the Denver airport and I went through the Chicago airport, Chicago O'Hare, and I obviously went through Tampa. And those airports just nothing seemed to have changed, because I've gone through O'Hare many times and I've gone through Tampa many times. It didn't seem like there was any progression, and so everywhere we went, it didn't seem like anything was really new, or like new construction or new buildings or unique or interesting architecture, which kind of again makes everything feel very much the same and a little bit I don't know, a little bit run down. But it's not all bad. Again, like I said, comparing this to the media that I saw and often watch on social media or in the news, you know, it's very easy to get those headline stories and it makes it look like the United States is this terrible country. It's not. It's really not. There's lots of people that live there, and they have perfectly fine lives. And although to me it looks like it hasn't progressed a lot of people like that. A lot of people don't like change. You know, here in China, things are changing so rapidly that it's hard to keep up sometimes. You'll go to a city and find places you like. You come back a year later and it's no longer there. The whole neighborhood, the whole area is gone and been completely redeveloped. So you can live perfectly fine in the United States. You know, there aren't drug addicts on every corner and homeless people on every corner, which the media sometimes makes it look like. And it's a perfectly fine country. I don't suspect I'll move back anytime soon, but if I had to, I'd probably be able to live there successfully and have no problems. I just don't really like the culture and the way things are so focused on materialism. And that was another thing. It seemed like everybody was like, the energy of the people seemed off to me. Seemed like everybody was struggling a little bit. It seemed like everybody was trying to, like, the people that I interacted with, it just seemed a little bit of a desperation to it. And if I don't have to go back, I probably won't. It's nice to visit, like I said in previous videos. It's nice to see my family. It's nice to see, eat some of the food and see some of my family and friends. Don't really have any friends there anymore. It's been so long. But it's nice to see family members and to, enjoy your childhood from afar, if that makes sense. You can come in, spend a week or two, and then leave. But overall, I had a great trip. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to my impressions of the United States. I sometimes have been critical in the past, and I'm still critical. I think it's always easier to be more critical on your own country than it is on your, adopted country or where you're currently living, especially when you're not part of the culture. So here in China, I see all the good because that's what I'm looking for. Whereas oftentimes in the United States, I go back and I think, this isn't very good because I'm more critical because I know how good it could be if they had the proper policies in place to improve that country. But yeah, what do you guys think? Do you guys think the United States is still okay, or do you really believe the news that it's all run down? I was surprised because I saw very much what I grew up with, and it didn't feel like it had changed, even though the media has changed, or at least the media I'm consuming has changed to make it look much worse than it actually is. So leave a comment below, especially if you live in the United States. Let me know how your experience is. Do you think it is still a great place to live, or do you think it's gotten worse in the last, decade or 15 years? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.
We're almost at 100K.
Yvonne, we're almost at 100K. Yeah, make sure you subscribe so that we can get to 100K this year. That's the goal. It would be really awesome. So subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.